На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. We'll return this week after the international break has finally gone and left us, and the RPL will return this weekend. But we will leave some RPL chats to one side, and we're going to focus a little bit more on the Russia games, and that was, of course, Russia versus Slovakia, a 1-0 win. A 2-1 win away to Slovenia. Some under-21 matches in which they dispatched Northern Ireland 1-0 and Lithuania 3-0. Move on to some of the big news of the window, in which Lokomotiv Moscow announced the successor to Marko Nikolic, and that is the German Markus Gisdol, which has been, to be fair, met with a mixed response at best on social media amongst the Russian football echo chamber. And then we'll finish off by just a quick review of the recent FNL Action in lieu of the RPL, which hasn't took place of late. To do so, as always, I'm joined by David.
Evening.
And back again for the first time in a couple of weeks is Richard.
Good evening, James. Good evening, David. How are we all?
You know what? I'm good. It was a surprisingly nice international break. I liked the video, particularly of Karpin dancing with the players. I thought that was just nice to see a little bit of a different side to him, because he's been quite uptight, I think is the fair word to say, maybe, since he's been Russia boss. A little bit combative in interviews and on the defensive quite a lot. So it's good to see that side of him, because, to be fair, you did see quite a lot of him in a relaxed atmosphere at Rostov and at Spartak. And of course, it is largely just a little bit of marketing that always is easily accepted. But it's nice to see after two good wins. And to quickly go into those two good wins, the first one, of course, Russia beat Slovakia 1-0 in Kazan. An early Milan Skriniar own goal led Russia to take the lead before half-time. And then in the second half, Russia essentially defended for almost the entirety of the game, pretty much from the moment that they scored. They only had one shot on target through the entirety of the game, while Slovakia had 5 shots on target from 26 attempts and 70% possession. So it's fair to say that it was one-way traffic in this one, David.
Yeah, one-way traffic, but not not fast traffic. Once Russia scored their goal, and particularly after half-time, they shifted formation. They played 4 at the back in the first half. And we had Terekov and Sutomin on the wings. The fullbacks, I should say, sorry. Now, obviously, Terekov, we know, is a wing-back by trade, and Sutomin is an attacker by trade, but has played fullback. So both of them are sort of probably more suited to playing as a wing-back. So and Terekov particularly had not had the best first half, and Slovakia were clearly targeting his side. So Karpin switched to 5 at the back at half-time. Yeah, went ultra-defensive. Really just tried to shut up shop. The second half, it wasn't a pretty second half in terms of trying to counter or get out. Zabolotny came on at one point and I think touched the ball probably like twice. Just added nothing to the game. But Slovakia, while you say they had like 20 odd shots, 26, 27 shots, none of them were real good chances. They didn't create tons of great chances. Just Russia defended well, forced them to shoot from bad positions or try long shots. We've got to give them credit. I think the stat that I put somewhere or that I read somewhere was that out of their 27 shots, Slovakia's XG was like 1.14, which is dreadful for that many shots. It's so bad. Russia. We after the game we were talking. Russia's defense were excellent. Jikia, Diveyev, Safonov were very good. They made sure that Safonov wasn't tested particularly often. I haven't checked, but I don't imagine he had to make too many saves, not especially difficult saves. The one that I do remember was in the first half from Haraslin from outside the box, which was an excellent save. So yeah, it wasn't pretty. The goal was sort of a bit out of nothing as well, and obviously an own goal. It was a good move, good counter. That was a counter attack, and it was a Karian's cross, which was just jabbed home by Skriniar. But they got the job done. That was all they needed to do. Karpin obviously had a game plan that was let's take the league and then shut up shop. And whilst that's not pretty, it was an important game and it worked. So all credit to the team. They did what they needed to on the day, particularly in defence.
I must admit, I've joked before that Marek Hamšík, now at the age of 34, having spent 6 months or so in Sweden with Göteborg, released after his contract expired, went to Trabzonspor in the summer. 2 years in China. I would have thought that 34-year-old him, well past his prime, would have been like a prime RPL free agent signing. But to his credit, I thought he actually played really well in the game. I thought he controlled and dictated the majority of goings on in midfield, obviously alongside Juraj Kucha, and Andrea Duda as well, so a very experienced Slovakia sort of centre of the park. But yeah, I agree. I thought defensively, while I didn't necessarily think that Russia needed to sit so deep, because Slovakia weren't offering that much, defensively I think they were brilliant. Zhikia is continuing some excellent form this season. I think it's arguably the most consistent I've seen him in years. He's always been prone to having a wonderful performance here or there, but the level of consistency that he's shown both for Spartak and the national team, and as trusted as a real leader, I've been highly impressed with him. He was arguably my man of the match on the night for Russia. Maybe him, could easily give it to Diveyev and Safonov as well, of course, but I was equally impressed by Zelimkhan Bakayev. I know you had pointed out his pressing throughout the entirety of the game and his harrying of Slovakia's attack and the defence when they were progressing the ball as something quite key for Russia, especially with 10 men behind the ball. In missing Dzyuba, of course, is that sort of outlet. Often when you see Russia perform like this and sit deep, Dzyuba plays an important role because of his ability to just carry the ball away and alleviate pressure on the defence. I thought Bakayev did an excellent job because his closing down, his pressure, and I can imagine Slovakia's PPDA was quite high because Russia sat back. But Bakayev was one of the ones who really took the game to them and allowed the defence to breathe every now and again. And I think that's that structure from the top where they pressed quite high and then that real tight bank of four at the back really limited Slovakia, as you said, to that real low XG figure. Richard, who was your man of the match in the Slovakia game? Did anyone impress you in particular?
Yeah, I'd probably go with those three players that you mentioned there, James. Safonov, Diveyev and Zhikia. For all three of them, played very, very well in what was, it was not the best of games, let's be frank, was it? Both sides, I think, there was not a huge amount of clear-cut chances in the game. It was an own goal that obviously won it. And as David pointed out, Slovakia, whilst they might have had a lot of shots, their XG was low for the amount of shots that they had. And I think they only had 5 shots out of 27 on targets. A lot of long-distance shots or shots that were very comfortable for Safonov to save. I do specifically remember Safonov making one very good save. I think it might have been just before half-time when Russia were leading 1-0 when he was dived. I think he dived at full stretch to stop a shot going into the net. And then in the second half, I just want to single out Zhikia as well for a lot of praise, because there was one time when I think Slovakia, they'd just broken into the box on one of the flanks of the box and were hurrying towards goal, and I think they'd hit a shot, and I think Zhikia just got ahead and blocked it, and it was a really good block, good positioning. Him and Diveyev were excellent. And I also think as well, to be fair to Russia, the performance was also conditioned by the fact that it is important to remember that they were missing Alexei Miranchuk and Alexander Golovin. I looked at the stats earlier, and I think Russia only had 26% possession in that game. But then again, when you're missing arguably your two two of your better players, and in the case of creativity, two of your most fundamental players in Golovin and Miranchuk, that's going to have an impact on the possession statistics and the kind of game that you can play. So, based on all of that, I thought the Slovakia result was a good result, and I think Opta Ivan also had an interesting comment too about Slovakia as an opponent for the Russian national team in the sense that I think Russia's lost their last two matches to Slovakia, which obviously was the first qualification game in Bratislava in March, and then the last time Russia played Slovakia was at Euro 2016 when Slovakia won 2-1 in that horrendous campaign for Spornaya at the Euros in France. So they've been a bit of a bogey side for Russia in the last couple of years. So for Russia to get that win was crucial, even if it was a case of winning ugly. But yeah, I think those three players that you highlighted there, Safonov, Diveev and Zhikia were my three who particularly shone and impressed in that victory over Slovakia.
Mm-hmm. How do you think that Terekov played on his full debut? Obviously, David mentioned that he started on the left of a four and then was shifted into his more natural and regular position at wing back. Do you think that he could potentially take advantage of the injuries at fullback, him and Sutorman as well, to try and stake a place?
I mean, if he carries on performing for Sochi, then yeah, why not? There's injuries at the moment. It's a weird feeling at 30 years of age, isn't it? Making your international debut. Yeah, I thought at the beginning, there was probably a little bit of nerves there at the beginning. But yeah, I think if he continues to perform quite well, then he's got to keep being given a chance because Russia's player pool is not the highest. We all know that. So I think he'll certainly still be in Karpin's thoughts. I think, especially with Sochi having a good season. But yeah, I think Samoshnikov. I think I'd like to see him hopefully come back soon. I don't know how serious his injury is, but yeah, I thought. He's worth persisting with, and like I say, if he carries on performing well for Sochi and they keep doing well, I think Karpin will keep giving him a chance.
And David, what do you think? Is Terekov and Sutorman here to stay, or not really?
Well, I was going to firstly just echo the Bakayev. I completely forgotten about Bakayev and how good he was. Just ran, and I should also mention who. Another player who we'll talk about probably after the Slovenia match, Kuzayev, and actually we'll leave Kuzayev for now, but he was excellent also. Terekov, I mean, he didn't have a good first half. Second half, he missed an open goal from 2 yards out. Granted, he was offside, but he did miss, which wasn't good. The ball was just a little bit behind him, but he bombed on well, at least, which was promising, but probably the downside from his perspective is that the next game he did not start and Kudryashov did, and he similarly was not too good. So yes, Russia will need Samoshnikov and Karavayev back as soon as possible. Obviously, with Mario's retirement, that throws a little bit of a spanner in the works. But because Karavayev had obviously been playing left back to accommodate Mario at right back, my preference would be carry on with Karavayev at right back and Samoshnikov at left back. But obviously Karavayev can play both. And then you've got Sutormin as well. But presuming Karavayev's back, Sutormin will lose his starting role at Zenit as a fullback. And there'll be less chances, obviously, available. Obviously, we had Adamov in the squad this time. He didn't play on either game. Obviously, he's obviously in Karpin's mind as a potential for the fullback roles. But Terekov, I don't think he'll be earning many more caps unless there are further injuries. I think we'll end up seeing Samoshnikov and Karavayev back in at left back. Even if Sutormin stays at right back, I think the left back will definitely need to be reverted because both him and Kudryashov were targeted and exploited quite well by both the teams that Russia played this break.
Yeah, certainly. Now we'll move on to the second game because in the first, as you said, Terekov started at left back, and in the second, what feels like 50-year-old plays once a year, Fyodor Kudryashov replaced him for the Slovenia match, and that was, of course, a 2-1 win in Maribor. Goals from the two centre backs, Georgi Zhikia and Igor Diveev. personally, I agree with what I think you were alluding to before, David, and I'll let you wax lyrical about him now. And I think that Dalakaziaev was probably the best player on the pitch in the Slovenia game.
Well, certainly Russia's best player. He was. It was just a classic Kazayev performance. I'd love to see some stats on distance covered and stuff, and sprints per game and things like that. None of the platforms I've got access to have that for the RPL. But we know he will just run constantly, and that game he was just running for the whole 90 minutes. Even towards the end, he was pressuring players up. Russia had some really good chances towards the end to kill the game off. It wasn't like the Slovakia game in that sense at all. Russia had their 2 goals in the first half, quickly conceded one back, and then they did defend the second half. But unlike the Slovakia game, they had chances on the counter attack. None of them ended in a shot, or certainly not a lot of them. But they had some really good openings where there was 3v2, 4v2, 2v1, and on all occasions they just didn't make the most of those. The wrong pass, or a bad pass, or the defender maybe just getting a touch. But they definitely had chances to take that game to a more comfortable scoreline. But they did it. It was 2 goals, obviously from set pieces in the first half. Russia, prior to that, had been not too bad. Slovenia I would say it was a fairly even game. Both teams were having shots and chances. Russia had a penalty awarded and then overturned because I think Smolov was marginally offside when Oblak took him down. But yeah, they got the 2 goals. They tried to defend. They exploited Kudryashov and scored back. And yeah, second half was a bit nervy. I noticed that there was a historical game that was being referenced a lot from, I think, 2004, where Russia had played in Maribor, which is where this game was being played, and both Zhirkov and Kurzhikov were sent off as Russia lost to Slovenia. And I think Karpin, I feel like Karpin was involved in that game somehow. I don't know. Probably not, though. Doesn't feel like it's his era. But, there was huge pride when that whistle went. There was a huge outpouring on social media of pride and adoration for the team again. Probably one of the most well-received Russian victories since the World Cup, you would say. Obviously, this is a big game in terms of trying to get to the next World Cup. And obviously, at the same time, Croatia drew their game against Slovakia, which doesn't really do too much to change what Russia need to do. But a big result, and Kazayev was just fantastic in this particular game.
Yeah, I was really impressed. I agree. I thought it was just a prototypical Kazayev performance. That Slovenia Russia game you mentioned, I remember it was a playoffs for the World Cup. It's South Africa, so it would have been for the 2010 World Cup. So it was in November 2009, and that's why it was such a big deal. It was because it was a World Cup playoff. The losing that meant that Russia didn't qualify, and it was the old it was obviously after 2008. That's such a massively successful team. If you just look through the lineup, it was Akinfeev, Ines Pomp, Anyukov, Belazutsky, Ignashevich, Jan Bayev, Zhirkov, Denisov, Ziryanov, Arshavin, Bilyaletinov, and Pavlyachenko. So it was a very star-studded team at the time, managed by Hiddink, who did so well. It was Kurzhikov and Zhirkov were sent off. I think Zhirkov got 2 yellow cards in 2 minutes right at the end of the game. So that was very much as a revenge mission, really. And it was the first time that, as you said, Russia had played Slovenia in Slovenia since then. Obviously, the first time they played Slovenia was the other round of this, the other leg of this sort of tie. So it was very much one long in the memory that hurt quite a bit because of the manner of the loss and everything around it. So it was a little bit of, I think they called it even on the official Team Spornaya, at Team Russia Twitter account, even called it revenge. I think it was the word they said. So personally, I think that's a bit much. But like I say, I'm not emotionally invested in it. So if you are emotionally invested in it and remember that vividly, I can understand being so disappointed at the result, considering how good that team was. But Richard, what were your thoughts more in general about the match? Do you think this was a better performance than the Slovakia game?
Yeah, I think it was a better performance. I had a look at the stats for it just recently. I think it was 11 shots by Russia with 6 on target, and they had 45% possession, and Slovenia had 15 shots with only 5 on target, and they had 55% possession. So you could instantly tell that with Miranchuk in the side, you have a more creative midfield. Obviously, they still, Golovin is still going to come back into that side, and when he does come back, that's a big help. So I think really considering both the games and this international break, I think it was just a classic case of just getting through, and I think fair dues to Karpin, I think this was, a tough international break. It's only his second international break as Russia manager, only his fourth and fifth game as Sportnaya manager. And, you have to hand it to him. He's gone out and got 6 points out of 6. I was probably not expecting Russia to get 6 points in this international break, especially when we were documenting, I remember listening to last week's pod, all the injuries that he had to contend with, players withdrawing from the squad, no Golovin and Miranchuk in midfield. So I think this second game against Slovenia was a better performance than Slovakia. But all things considered, I think it was just a classic case, this international break of just getting the points, making do. If they'd have got 4 points out of 6, it wouldn't have been a bad scenario either. But to get 6, I think that's a really good thing. And, it's guaranteed minimum now of playoffs spot for Russia, which is good. Obviously, Slovakia, after, their World Cup hopes went up in flames when they lost to Russia in Kazan, then did Russia a favour by drawing against Croatia. So now Russia are back on top of this group. And it is in their own hands now going into those final 2 games against Cyprus and Croatia in November. And yeah, there's obviously as you mentioned there, James, the avenging the 2009, World Cup qualifying playoff defeat to Slovenia. So that's also been done as well. Again, got to praise the 2 centre defenders, Shakir and Diveyev, both excellent. I'm really happy with Safonov in this international break. I hope now that he gets a run of games. Now with the national team, I'm glad that he's moved on from Guilherme. That's another positive from Karpin. Fomin's set pieces were good. The first goal came from a Fomin set piece, where Diveyev headed home, and I think he take the corner for Shakir's brilliant overhead kick. I think he might have done. I thought Fomin had a decent game, set piece deliveries. Agree, echoed thoughts about Kuzayev. Thought he was excellent. He's having a really good season. He's showing the Kuzayev form of 2 seasons ago once again. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of positives to take out of this international break from Russia's point of view, and they just need 4 points in these last 2 games now to top the group and qualify for the World Cup. So definitely a lot more positives to come out of this international break, even in spite of the limitations that Karpin had to work with.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest take out of this. Obviously, a little bit worries regarding. We had some worries regarding the composition of the squad because of the sheer amount of injuries and players missing for various reasons, for fatigue and whatever else. And to be after a difficult away game and a home game where, while yes, Slovakia may not be necessarily performing to their to a standard, they are still a team that were at the Euros, are by no means slouches in any way, and are probably a similar level ability to Russia. Maybe not quite as good when you get the full national pool, but similar in terms of ability. They are good. So to, like I said, we both said, to get 6 points out of this and the international break is top of the group ahead of Croatia with a vastly depleted squad, now unbeaten in 5 games under Karpin, including already having playing Croatia and drawn 0-0. It's becoming quite a successful campaign so far. The next 2 games will be, and the final 2 games in this group qualifying stages will be Russia versus Cyprus and Croatia versus Russia in early to mid-November. So a lot of it's going to come down to that last game, you'd think, that Croatia match, and whether Russia could steal first ahead of them. but we will cover that at the next international break. And to quickly finish off our international section of the pod, the under-21s also had 2 games. First of all, playing Northern Ireland under-21s in Himki. They won 1-0 with a goal courtesy of Danila Prokin. David, you watched both games. How did they play against Northern Ireland?
Northern Ireland I thought was going to be a walkover because in the last break they'd lost 4-0 to Malta, who Russia had roundly beaten 6-0. But they were much better than I thought. I mean, I was looking at the squad and they had a number of established players from various levels of the English Football League. So I was a little surprised that they'd lost to Malta so convincingly, because they were fairly good against Russia. Didn't offer a great deal in attack, had 1 or 2 good attacks in the first half, but certainly didn't seem like terrible. Like, I was surprised that they'd lost so badly to Malta. Russia had an early goal ruled out offside. It wasn't offside. It should have stood. It was Klusevic. And then the winning goal came from a corner. Vignov sliced his shot, and it just dropped to the feet of Prokin, who just had a tap in, really. But decent performance. Certainly lacking in wingers in the squad. They just had Karapuzov and Klusevic. And when Karapuzov went off at half-time, Ignatov came on, and Ignatov struggled from a wide position. But that was it was a good result in the end. They didn't have a great deal further chances, but they limited Northern Ireland also, who to maybe 1 or 2 chances right at the death where they started pushing for it. So all good there. And then the Lithuania game was eventually, I mean, it was a fairly straightforward game. They just couldn't score in the first half. Karpin had a couple of good efforts saved. But then once they broke the deadlock in the second half through to Karpin, it then quickly devolved for Lithuania. I think they conceded 3 times in sort of 10, 15 minutes. An own goal through some pressure from Karpin and Suleimanov. Guy passed it back to his goalie, maybe a bit too aggressively from the edge of his own penalty area. And Karpin and Suleimanov were both within a yard of him. So the goalie had to just kick it first time, and he completely air kicked it. It just rolled into the net. And then it was a good third goal, a good movement from Karpin, pulled off at the back post and had a tap in from a Maritish-Philly cross. Then we had some debuts from Leon Klaassen, the Austrian-based player. Got on and played the last few minutes. He actually did play on the wing. Came on for someone, I forget who, maybe Klusevic actually, and played on the left flank for the last 10 minutes. And Kuzmichov from Ural also played the last few minutes. So a couple of debuts, certainly lacking the squad in the wide players, the 2 Spanish-based players, Josifov, who I believe now Josifov has scored or assisted in his last 4 games for Villarreal's second team, who play in the Spanish third tier. And has also appeared on the bench for Villarreal senior team at least twice. So I was surprised that he wasn't called up. Maybe it was to do with the pandemic and they couldn't get him because he was clearly fit. He was playing. But him and Savityan were both, I thought, fairly good in the last international break. And the squad needs more wingers, definitely. Karapuzov was hit and miss in the first game, and he played the first 45. Didn't play at all in the second, or if he did, only the last few minutes. So we need some more Russian wingers in this age group. When you think domestically, who's available, they're either slightly too old or maybe slightly too young. If we're looking at players like, maybe Pinyaev or one of the Shitov twins, or maybe Melnikov. But if we're looking to get someone with some more experience, then the 2 guys from Spain, I think, need to be in the next squad. But 2 good wins, and they should be okay to finish second in this group after Spain.
Yeah, you'd think so. And obviously in that second match, Russia beat Lithuania 3-0 away from home. Brace and Konstantin Tukavin set them off to the victory. What happened to Nail Umyarov towards the end of that game? Because he's now going to miss what's expected to be, a month, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah, he just took a heavy challenge, and from what I could gather, he was helped off by two staff, not carried off, but where they're supporting him on either arm with his boot off. I think it was his left ankle, if I recall, but limped off with what I presume is an ankle sprain of some sort. The technical term is like slightly torn capsular muscle or something like that, which I think is just a sciencey word for sprain, because a sprain essentially does involve tearing of muscles, even if not full tears. Sprains are tears. So I think he just quite badly sprained his ankle and had to come off, which is a shame. Spartak obviously struggling for midfield numbers, but I believe Hendricks and Zobnin are both back and available. So not a huge blow. A shame, because Umyarov and Litvinov were so good together in those last couple of games before the international break. And Umyarov's been on particularly good form this season. Quite rarely is the captain for the under-21s. And it's funny, like I think back to when I remember very distinctly, we have a friend of ours who's a scout at a top club in the UK, but he has an interest in Russian football and he's in one of our chats. And I remember he was in Russia once and commented on Umyarov when he went to see a Chertanova game when Umyarov was just 17. And I can go find the message for you afterwards, potentially. So it's nice to see, that he's come such a long way, and still only 20, and I think playing better than ever.
Yeah, certainly. I echo that entirely. I think this season's been a real mature season for Nail Umyarov, and it's unfortunate to see him pick up this injury, but these things do happen. I know for a fact Zobnin is expected to be back for this weekend. Whether or not he's fit to start, I'm not quite sure, but he's expected to be in and around the squad again. Not quite sure on Hendricks, not quite sure if it make that much of a difference. But no, they do need numbers in there, obviously, with Umyarov's injury and Kral's departure in the summer. So a shame to see him injured, but another, like I say, good 2 wins and good 2 performances from the under-21. So looking pretty decent on all levels and all the top end levels for Russia at the moment. We will now divert from international football and to Moscow. Of course, during the international break, it all kicked off in Moscow. We've covered last week and the week before the rumours regarding Marko Nikolic and then the eventual sacking, and analysed the sacking a little bit. So, Richard, because you've had a couple of weeks off, first of all, what do you think about the Nikolic sacking?
Yeah, so regards to Nikolic, I was listening to the pod last week, obviously, and the news came. It was, I agree with kind of what David said on the pod, whereby Ranić and Zorn were sort of kind of looking for any kind of reason to move Nikolic on, because obviously they didn't appoint him and they want to bring in their own guy. Any kind of questionable run of form from Lokomotiv. They haven't been playing particularly well. I think Nikolic hadn't won, I think, in the last 4 or 5 matches in all competitions, 5 or 6 maybe. So, it was obviously the kind of time when the kind of run of form where, Zorn and Ranić were probably going to use against him to, probably look to influence replacing him. I feel a little bit sorry for him, because obviously we've heard all the stories, haven't we, come out about, some of the signings not being consulted on the signings. But obviously when you have directors of football at clubs, that sometimes does happen. The manager, although you would like to think, that the manager would get some say in it with the director of football. There would be some consultations. So yeah, it's kind of a sad way for it all to come to an end, because I really enjoyed Nikolic's time at Lokomotiv. I think, he well and truly silenced the doubters who, were critical of him when he came in, to replace obviously a club legend in Yuri Schumann. But I thought last season, he led Lokomotiv to the cup. Second place the season before, steadied the ship nicely after Schumann left. And then, some good performances in Europe against Atletico Madrid in both those matches. Honourable loss to Bayern at home, honourable draw with Salzburg away. So I will be sad to see Nikolic go. And I hope he can find himself a new job sometime soon in the upcoming future, upcoming months. And obviously Lokomotiv have disclosed his replacement, Markus Gisdol. So, yeah, we'll have to see. This is obviously on Ranić now. Him and Zorn will have been influential in this firing of Nikolic and hiring of Gisdol. So we'll have to see how this comes about. It's a big gamble from them, but at least with the international break, it was a time for them to, make the change, and they've not lost any extra club matches. They've done it during the international break. So, but yeah, it's a gamble from them, but from both of them, from Zorn and Ranić. So, we'll have to see how it goes, because I certainly think with the amount of money Lokomotiv have spent this summer and the players that they brought in, that they can challenge for a title. So, be a fascinating couple of months ahead, let's just say.
And on Gisdol, of course, it's very early to make any form of judgment. But immediately after the announcement, let's be fair to say that those who know German football were less than enthused about the appointment. Richard, you've been doing a little bit of research into Gisdol, so what have you found out about him?
Yeah, I'm looking into Gisdol's career. He retired in 1996 as a player after a career mainly spent in the lower leagues of German football. His first major coaching role was at Stuttgart's reserve team. Between 2005 and 2007 at Stuttgart 2, he achieved 7th and 3rd place finishes in the Regionalliga Süd. That was then Germany's 3rd tier. Further stints in the lower leagues of German football followed over the next 2 years, before Gisdol then became manager of Hoffenheim's reserves, Hoffenheim 2, in 2009. And here in a 2-year spell, he won promotion from the German 5th tier to the 4th tier in his first season, and then achieved the 5th place finish in the 4th tier the following season with Hoffenheim's reserves. Intriguingly, the manager at Hoffenheim's first team, when Gisdol was in charge of Hoffenheim's reserves, was none other than Ralf Rangnick himself. And then in March 2011, Rangnick left Hoffenheim to take the vacant Schalke job, and Gisdol joined Rangnick in Gelsenkirchen as Rangnick's assistant, where he was there for the entirety of Rangnick's spell there. He was appointed Hoffenheim first team manager on the 2nd of April 2013, with just 7 matches left in the 2012-13 Bundesliga season. He led them to an eventual 16th place finish in a promotion relegation playoff against Kaiserslautern of the 2 Bundesliga, and Hoffenheim won that game over 2 legs to preserve their top flight status. And in 2013-14, Gisdol had arguably his best spell in management so far with Hoffenheim. He led them to 9th and 8th placed finishes respectively in the Bundesliga in those 2 seasons. Key players he developed during this time include Roberto Firmino, who of course later on would join Liverpool. Nicolas Süle became a first-team regular at Hoffenheim under Gisdol, and then current Leicester City defender, former Borussia Mönchengladbach and Southampton defender Yannick Vestergaard. He was sacked early in the 2015-16 season at Hoffenheim after a run of poor results. His next managerial job was Hamburg in September 2016, and he helped them survive in the 1 Bundesliga. I think it was with a 14th place finish. However, in January 2018, he was sacked after poor results with Hamburg. And come the season's end, Hamburg were relegated from the Bundesliga for the very first time. And then partway through the 2019-20 season, he joined Cologne. He led the Billy Goats to a 14th place finish in the 2019-20 Bundesliga season, before then being sacked in April 2021 with Cologne struggling in 17th place and in the Bundesliga relegation zone. Some pieces I've read on Gisdol indicate his favoured formation is reportedly a 4-2-3-1, which is interesting. And I guess what you could say is that this is an appointment where, yeah, I can sort of understand the let's just say the lack of enthusiasm for it, or mixed response to it at best when the news broke. Obviously, he looked like he did quite a decent job with Hoffenheim, stabilising them in the mid-table of the Bundesliga. But then, since then, it's sort of all gone a bit downhill. Spells at Hamburg and Cologne not been particularly great, although in the case of Hamburg, I guess you could possibly defend the fact that the season before Hamburg got relegated from the Bundesliga, they were sort of dicing with death anyway. I seem to remember I think between 2013 and 2016, there were three seasons in a row where they survived in the relegation playoffs. So you could make the argument the issues at Hamburg, whilst Gisdol didn't do particularly well there, the issues at Hamburg were more long-term. A bit like Tedesco at Schalke. Tedesco did well at Schalke one season, not so good the second season and was sacked. But the issues at Schalke obviously showed to be long-term because so many managers went there and failed. So I guess you could argue that in his defence with Hamburg. Obviously, Cologne, again, wasn't great. So this is probably a drinking in the last chance saloon appointment, really, from Gisdol's point of view. He needs to impress here at Lokomotiv. Otherwise, his chances of getting decent level employment going forward are going to be compromised. When you go to Germany for a manager, you're not going to. Russian Premier League clubs are not going to attract the very best German coaches. They're just way out of sync. The guy who followed on from Gisdol at Hoffenheim was a certain Julian Nagelsmann, and obviously with him impressing there, he's gone on to Bayern Munich. So it is what it is. You're not going to get the very best coaches from Germany coming to the RPL, but you'd hopefully Gisdol won't be as uninspiring as what we're led to believe and the impression that we've got from people who watch German football a lot more than what we do. Obviously, it's concerning when they give you the viewpoint of that, of his time, especially his last couple of jobs at Hamburg and Cologne. But just fingers crossed. I really hope Rangnick has made the right call here, because I think sacking Nikolic and then bringing in a manager whose last couple of jobs have not been great is a huge gamble. So we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. They've done it during an international break, as I mentioned earlier, so they've not really lost any games, any league matches, and they've been in a stuttering run of form. So hopefully he's had a couple of days on the training ground, hopefully with the players, and they've responded to what he wants to do, and they can get going off the mark quickly. There's two massive games against Galatasaray coming up in the Europa League, and the games come thick and fast now as the Christmas period, as we approach the autumn and winter period, and the break. So he's gonna have to find his feet quickly. But just all I can say is that hopefully it's a good appointment. Hopefully the doubters will be proven wrong, and maybe he might be a success. But we'll just have to wait and see, because obviously it's had a very mixed response, and understandably so. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think if you're a Bundesliga avid watcher and know more about Gisdol, if you get in touch with us on Twitter, of course, at Russ Football News, and let us know your thoughts regarding Gisdol in general. Personally, I don't have a huge knowledge base upon his tenure. I don't watch a great amount of German football, to be honest, but I'm willing to give him a chance. Rangnick, obviously, from the start, I think, David, you called this, that you were not surprised that Nikolic had departed, and that was under pressure because Rangnick and Zorn came in and wanted to do everything their way. Even less so surprised that he's a German coach. I think that was the writing on the wall from the very start. But David, what do you think about Gisdol's appointment? Have you seen much about him or not?
I'd never heard of him before. So therefore, it's very hard to have any opinion of my own. Really, I've not looked into his past. It would be very difficult for someone like me who doesn't have that German football knowledge base. But those people who we know and trust, obviously not giving the most glowing of reviews. For say in comparison to Schwartz, who, by the way, celebrated a year at Dino yesterday. Schwartz was getting fairly decent sort of talk before he came across. But this one seems, it doesn't bring a lot of hope to the table. But there's not much we can do but just watch and see if it all crumbles to the ground. It'll be on Zorn and Ragnick's head if Ragnick even stays. Obviously, he's been linked with the Newcastle job. What with their recent news, so we'll see what happens. He's already it's such a big thing, and yet because it happened in the international break, he's come in and started taking charge already with very little sort of fanfare about it. He was just sort of seemingly very quietly popped into place, and there he is coaching Lokomotiv Moscow suddenly. So yeah, we'll have to see how he gets on. Obviously, unknown quantity. Foreign managers are very, very much hit and miss in Russia. So we'll see how it goes. He's got a whole new squad to tame. It's a very different looking Lokomotiv from this time last year.
Yeah, it's very clear that they're edging towards the German route, obviously with Rangnick and Zone coming in, and then Gisdol as well, mirroring the plan that Spartak had to an extent. Mainly just the appointment to Tedesco, not a huge amount of planning going on behind the scenes. That's to no surprise. But in particular, Dinamo, who've really taken to Sandro Schwarz and Zlatko Buvac with their Bundesliga expertise. But Richard, any final words on Loko and the appointment of Gisdol?
Yeah, on Gisdol, I just want to say as well that I know that there was a couple of other managers that were linked with the job, wasn't there? There was talk of Lucien Favre, although don't actually be surprised if he's the one who ends up at Newcastle soon, because obviously with their takeover, you'd think Steve Bruce is on very thin ice now. There was talk of Robert Klaus, wasn't there, at Nuremberg, but obviously Nuremberg are going to be one of the strongest sides in 2 Bundesliga. I think, they're normally a side who I've seen play a lot of time in the Bundesliga in the past through keeping an eye on the league here and there. And, they might have approached Nuremberg for Klaus, but maybe Nuremberg demanded a large compensation fee. And obviously the issue of moving managers moving jobs mid-season is never easy. So maybe Lokomotiv were probably constrained by what they could do, who they could appoint. They might have to go for someone out of work. So, yeah, I mean, the references we've got from people who know German football, obviously a lot more than what we do, have been, let's just say, very mixed at best. But I'm like you, James. I'm prepared to give him a chance. And foreign managers are often very hit and miss in Russia, like what David said too. So we'll just have to give him a chance and wait and see. But it might have also came down to availability. That is an important factor to realise as well. Getting managers to move mid-season is not easy, and maybe the club might have demanded too much compensation to release them. I mean, who knows? But we'll just have to.
But if that's the case, then don't sack Nikolic.
It's the last word on Gisdol before we do move on to the FNL. I implore people to go out and find the Loko Twitter photo they put up of Zone introducing Gisdol to the players, and it's really it's weird. It just looks like something like Uncanny Valley, like you would see out of like a sitcom, like Arrested Development or Seinfeld or Curb Your Enthusiasm. It's just so bizarre. You've got Zone there with a roll neck on, kind of introducing Gisdol, who's standing in head-to-toe Loko training gear. But the pose that Gisdol's doing, it's kind of like he's posing for like one of the old like 90s like catalogue magazines that you would used to see. And it's just really bizarre. And like the players are just like watching on in the foreground. It's such a weird photo. But good luck to Gisdol. I think he's going to probably need it looking at the early reaction and some of Loko's recent form. But if we do drop down from RPL matters and to FNL, David, you've been champing at the bit to get back into some FNL action. So would you like to give a quick summary of some of the recent goings on down in the second tier?
It's turning into a very interesting and competitive season. We've got teams who have come into form, having started the season poorly, and we've got teams who are dropping form after starting the season very well. Top of the league are Orenburg, clear by 5 points, so not a huge distance, but still the team who have shone the brightest on the whole. Joel Fermier, their sort of big man with 9 goals so far this season. Then the chase for the playoffs is incredibly exciting. I was talking on Twitter yesterday with a couple of agents who work heavily in the FNL, and they were both talking previously about how excellent the season is. So from second place, which is currently Torpedo Moscow with 32 points, down to how far do we go to keep this sort of we'll go down to 9th, which is Spartak 2 on 25 points. So that's 7 points there, separating 7 teams. So we've got Torpedo and Alania, who are currently tied on 32, Skahabarovsk on 31, Neftihimik and Fakel on 30, Velez on 27, Akron and then Spartak 2 are both tied on 25, and then even Kanaz are 24, and then there finally is a gap. So the top 10 are sort of a step above the next group. Akron were one of the teams who I was going to mention, just won their 5th game on the bounce, having started the season incredibly poorly, and have therefore flown up into the top 8. Olympdog Prudny, who also started the season very poorly. They're sort of the new... the squad's basically built up of players from Chertanova and Khimki, and they have a lot of Khimki players on loan there. So a lot of Moscow-based players, following the sort of decline of Chertanova. So a very young squad there, but they've also hit some form recently and are climbing up out of the relegation zone. Rotor, one to mention, who not looking very good at all. Currently 12th on the same number of points as Olympdog, really, to be fair. But, for the squad that they have, obviously they were relegated from the RPL last year. Not a lot of that squad stayed, but there's a good core still there, and they have clearly some money to spend. But they haven't got it going this season at all, and it's been very underwhelming for them this season. And they lost yesterday, I believe, to Kuban, who are rock bottom of the table with just 11 points. So that wasn't good for them at all. And Baltica are on the same number of points, and they're also struggling. They recently changed their manager and put Sergei Ignashevich in charge. He then lost his first game yesterday to Volgar, who are second bottom in the league. So 2 World Cup stadiums featuring teams who are really struggling this year in Rotor and Baltica, both who are teams who are tipped to go on a promotion charge. But yeah, they're struggling. Teams who are really flying at the moment all have goal scorers. Torpedo have Amor Kalmakov, who's joint top scorer in the league with 11. Skakhabarovsk have David Karayev, who also has 11. They're 4th place over in the Far East. And Neftihimik, who are 5th under Koklov, right? The ex-Dinamo coach. Got a good young core they're going with a lot of ex-Dino players. Denisov, Moskvichov is there as well. And they've got Alexander Yushin, who scored 11 goals this season from midfield, 26 years old. So he's absolutely flying. And they're really making a push. So we've got a really competitive top sort of race for the title, as it were, or race for the playoffs. We should also give mention, I mentioned very, very briefly, but Velez Moscow, who had their squad absolutely torn apart last season. Obviously, last year they were promoted. They had a really good season, finished I think, top 6 in the end. Then their whole squad got decimated this summer. Manager disappeared, went off to Ufa, as we know, as did several other players, went up to the Premier League. They essentially have a brand new squad of guys who all came up from the 3rd tier, and they're flying. They're still doing really well, currently 7th place. And they've got one of my favourite players in the league, Artur Galoyan, who's got 7 assists this season, the young 21-year-old midfielder, who was very close to joining Siska in the summer until Ivica Olic left the club, at which point his transfer was cancelled, and then his backup move to Ufa was also cancelled because Ufa had already gone and signed someone else. So he ended up back at Velez after all of that, and is playing really well. At the bottom, I said we've already mentioned Volgar and Kuban, who are Kuban struggling horribly after promotion. Volgar really just not playing well at all. Stilshik having a fairly good run, and Azar Metalurg Lipetsk both have won a couple of games of late and are trying to get up out of the top, out of the bottom 4. And at this point, it's clubs like Baltica and Rotor who are looking like they could fall into that relegation race or relegation battle, as it was. But the bottom 4 are 4 points adrift, as it is. Metalurg 17th and Yenisei just above in 16th. So Bit of difference there, a bit of space. But yeah, that's sort of the state of the league at the moment. Very exciting season.
So it's Neftakimix is the other former Dynamo guy. So it's Kirill Novikov.
Oh, okay.
But Koklov at Rota, how is...
Oh, yeah.
But obviously Koklov, former Dynamo manager. Speaking of people who used to be based in Moscow, Ketar Kosanov obviously made the move to Alania Vladikavkaz last year. Alania under my favourite manager, because he's an absolute nutcase, Spartak Ogniev. I've just missed out on the playoffs last year. How are they doing this season? Obviously with Bachelor's Gertiev seemingly in quite good form as well. I think he's got among the highest of like goals to games ratios in the league.
Yeah, Gogniev actually was... I haven't looked for a translation of his presser, but he was very angry in his press conference yesterday because Alania actually lost the game for the first time in a little while. 2-1 to Akron, who, as I said, were on particularly good form. And I just saw a very small snippet of him looking very exasperated and feeling like, I mean, he's already had a ban last year for attacking a referee, and I felt like he was going to attack half the journalists in that press conference. Yeah, they're flying again. You know, that team that were denied a chance at the playoffs last year because of COVID and their lack of stadium, which they're trying to get sorted. Lots of players contributing really well. Gertiev has six goals and has only made 2 starts, but has played in 15 games in total. So he's appeared in almost every match, but almost always off the bench. A bit like how Shappy used to play for Krasnodar. So effective off the bench. Although he did manage a hat-trick in one game, which did boost his stuff. Nikolai Gurgobiani, if you remember him, who from a short spell at Ufa a couple of years ago. He's playing really well. 3 goals, 4 assists this season. I mean, the numbers, they're one of the only clubs in the top sort of 5 who haven't got a really big goal scorer. Gertiev with 6 is their top scorer. They've got goals and assists coming from all over their squad, which is generally a young one. Gurgobiani with 3 goals, 4 assists. Butamagomedov with 1 goal, 5 assists. David Kobasov, who is one of the 2 Kobasov brothers. He's the younger of the 2, and he's having an excellent season. He's, I think, on 4 goals, 4 assists now from midfield. He's looking like a promising young midfielder there. And obviously the 2 defenders, Kochiev, who almost moved to Belgium in the summer, and Shavlikov, both of those have chipped in with goals and assists as well. So it's a whole squad effort going on, and they're still maybe missing an out-and-out striker. The fact they haven't got a guy scoring, they create so many chances. They've not got a really big goal scorer who starts, every game. They've got a young striker, Eldar Rushev, who came from one of the Makhachkala clubs last year. He was playing in the PFL, and he's got 3 goals and an assist, having only made 5 starts. But he's still only 19, hasn't got a lot of experience. It would be great if they could get a striker. Obviously, we know, we can see that they like to get players in from the Caucasus. A lot of their squad are from that region, from Vladikavkaz or southern Russia. So maybe that's limiting them. But if they can do, then there will be a fearsome unit, because they score and create chances like there's no tomorrow. It makes them a bit vulnerable back, and they're a very fun team to watch. But I think if they can get the stadium sorted, they would be a big contender for promotion.
Yeah, I remember Nikolai Gyorgyoviani for his time at Chaika Pestchapagansk. I knew I was going to get it wrong, and I never ever pronounce that correctly. For his time at Chaika, before he joined Ufa, yes, because he was at Sochi as well. Before he joined Ufa, and Chaika now, of course, for everyone listening, are in the FNL 2. And if you look at their particular group in the FNL 2, which I think it's Group 1, I think theirs is, it's Chaika are second with 28 points from 12 games, behind SKA Rostov-on-Don. And in there are also Dynamo Makhachkala and Anji. I'll get into this because Anji, actually, speaking of the Makhachkala teams, there's 2 of them there. Anji are now bottom of the group with just was 25. Wait, that's not points. That's wrong. Right, but Angie at bottom of the group, I think, or the 5th in the group, sorry, and struggling quite a bit. So as a little Angie update, because you mentioned Makachkala, it's not going well for them, unfortunately. So hopefully
Really?
they can.
I thought I'd seen them. They were like one of the teams going for promotion.
Oh, this is unless this.
There's so many
wrong.
Makachkala teams in there. There's 3 teams from Makachkala in that league.
Hey, I'm
I
looking
think
at
they're like in the top 5.
I'm looking at the FNL L2 table. Unless the FNL L2 table hasn't been updated in a long time, which, to be fair, I wouldn't put it past the people who run the FNL L2 website because it's still called pfl-russia.com.
I only literally looked. It's funny you talk about this because I literally only looked at the tables like yesterday because I was like, who's coming up? Maybe even was today. I can't actually remember. I was just intrigued as to who was coming up.
Angie a 5th.
Promotion. Yeah, and it's like 17 teams.
Yeah,
so I think they're doing
Angie
okay.
a 5th. They're doing fine. They're doing better than I thought. Thanks, Pay for L FNL L2 website for still thinking that you're the Pay for L. It's been what for 3.5 months now, and they still haven't updated any of that. Wonderful. I'm not surprised in the least. But anyway, on that
Really?
absolute mess up. Yeah, look at the URL. It's still pfl-russia.com.
Oh, they've got a new website. I'll send you it after this.
Why does this one still active?
I don't know.
Why is the old website still got news on it?
The
It was updated yesterday.
The FNL website, as we know, is onefnl.ru. And I was like, well, naturally, they should go to fnl.ru, but they've not. They've gone to fnl.com. And that does appear to be up to date.
Right. Well, the pfl-russia.com, which is the old website,
It's shutting down.
the news still gets updated. I hope there's just there's one guy in like Makachkala just keeping the news section running while the rest of the website dies. Oh my god! Right. Anyway, before I embarrass everyone even more so with my lack of following the PFL because it's a farmers league, we'll be back next week for the usual time. This weekend we've got quite an exciting round of fixtures as the RPL does return. Of course, the biggest one is another Moscow derby, probably about the 14th of the season, as Spartak take on Dynamo. Elsewhere, Krylia Nizhny, Krasnodar Ufa, Ural Siska. Ural trying to keep up their really good run of form of late. And a little bit of a RFN derby is Rubin play Lokomotiv. For now, though, this has been the Russian Football News Podcast. Goodbye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет с ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.